What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Black Professionals Project. If you don't know by now, which hopefully you do since it's been about 7 months, my name is Kenton Hipsher. I'm the CEO and founder of the nonprofit, and our mission is to educate and inspire Black and Brown youths by exposing them to the careers of Black and Brown professionals like the one that we have with us here today. So without any further ado, let me introduce y'all to my homie, my best friend, my home dog, my road dog from school, Mr. Jonathan Currian.
Man, it's a pleasure to be here, man, to support you on such a big cause. Been a big fan from a distance, man. Been super proud of all the things you've been doing, Kenton, thus far. I think this has been a great project and initiative, and I can't wait to see what this blossoms into.
Thank you. Yeah. Hopefully, my goal is this will, touch a bunch of kids' lives and be able to better them and give them more options than at least what I had. I don't know necessarily about you, but growing up for me personally, everybody just told me, the world is your oyster. You decide what you want to do. There's tons of careers out there, but the amount of opportunities was very paralyzing for me and what I wanted to do personally. And then when I started looking into stuff, I was like, oh, there's so many careers out here I didn't even know existed, but I wish I would have known, before I decided on a specific path for school. So that's kind of the goal that I want to achieve with these videos here.
Yeah, I think it's a really noble cause. I mean, just like you, I am somebody who grew up under very, very Indian immigrating parents to this country. So they only gave me two options, which is pretty much doctor or engineer. And spoiler alert, y'all, I chose one of the two. I was super freaking lame. So, I mean, be like me if you're interested in what I do. And I'm really glad that I do what I do in retrospect. But I do think that there is a lot of truth telling that needs to be happening, especially from the older generation to the younger generation, on how many amazing options and career paths there are. I think especially, so many of our parents think in terms of just financial security. Oh, you got to do, one of these few jobs because it's going to really pay well and you'll be able to, secure a life for yourself and your family. And there's actually multiple things that can accomplish that. And they're all related to these types of fields. You don't have to be a doctor to work in the medical field. You don't have to be some type of whiz kid engineer to work in tech. There's so many other career paths and so many other things that are well needed in these industries that help everybody do their jobs well and also pay just as well too. And so hopefully this platform can be a part of telling that truth.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. And to me, it's really important to get you on here as well because a lot of our content is representing Black individuals in particular, but this project isn't specifically just for Black people, it's for Black and Brown people. And so I want to get the full spectrum, the full representation that I can get, and try to get everybody's stories too, because most of the time, when we think about successful people, we hear the classic didn't have a dad growing up, or was living in the hood until I was 18, and then I moved out and became this millionaire, successful giant or something. But those stories I don't feel are as common as they're portrayed in the media because they garner a lot of attention, a lot of traction. But I feel we need to provide representation also for the middle class people, for the people who did have a father or did have a mother, or have both parents in the household, and grew up in a regular life, for lack of better words. So I mean, those people also need to hear their stories and see people who look like them, sound like them as well in different careers. So let's get into it. Tell the people, how you would describe your ethnicity and then your hometown.
So I guess in terms of ethnicity, I am fully South Indian. I specifically try to say South Indian because, believe it or not, in India, I think there's, a bunch of provinces, at least 20 plus, and all of them are very, very culturally diverse. So just saying Indian sometimes wouldn't be able to do it enough because, somebody who's from Kashmir is going to be radically different from me. My parents come from the specific area in India called Kerala. It's off of the southwestern tip of India. It's a very, very tropical area. Really, really big trade post area since pretty much the spice trades were happening. So, Portugal would come over there a lot, Britain would come over there a lot, and Spain as well. And so because of that, that specific area of India actually ended up becoming a lot more globalized than other parts of the country at that time. It became a lot more religiously diverse. Believe it or not, a majority of the people who live in Kerala are either Catholic or Christian. They're not Hindu or Islam. It's the only province in India where that's kind of like the dominant religion. And it's also a really, really big scene in India just for, biomedical technologies, software technologies, and just pharmaceuticals as well. It seems to be a pretty big hub, especially for like college talent and stuff like that for South India. So it's really cool to see that province take off, and it's really dope to know that it's, part of the heritage that I come from. In terms of like my upbringing and stuff like that, I kind of bounced around a lot. As a kid, I was born in New York. That's kind of where I spent the first little bit of me growing up too. I was born in Queens. It's the best borough, if anybody asks. It's the backbone of New York. I refuse to hear otherwise. And that was a very, very interesting upbringing because, my dad had just freshly immigrated from India to the United States, and him, his sister's family, him and two of his sister's family were all living in one townhouse together. So 3 families were stuck in one townhouse, and that's what I was born into. And over that time, I would slowly witness my dad kind of, work his way through kind of building his own business in America, kind of striving to get that piece of the American dream that so many immigrants are sold on. And really, really just kind of witnessing all of the steps that it takes, not only to become a successful entrepreneur in this country, but to also learn what it is to be financially stable in a completely culturally different environment. My dad had to learn a brand new language. My dad had to work with people of completely different ethnicities that he wasn't used to, because previously he was working at Motorola. He worked his way all the way up to being like the former vice president of telecommunications for Motorola at that time, which was a huge deal back then. He was working a lot out of Singapore and like Southeastern Asia mostly, so Taiwan, Singapore, India, and he had gained enough experience and knowledge that he realized that there was a niche business that he could kind of, find and found in telecommunications, and specifically radio business, especially from peer-to-peer. And so he was like, you know what, people keep telling me these great things about America and how it's like, not just, the biggest market in the world right now, but it's continuing to be on this upwards trajectory. I know that there isn't that much competition over there. Here's this thing that I have complete control over for like one of the biggest telecommunication corporations of the world. Let me see what I can go do over there. And he literally risked it all. He unfortunately, whenever me and my brothers and sisters would fuck up, my dad would always like hit us over the head with be like, yo, I came from this country with $20 and built this business. You out here going to the movies? Like, who do you think you are? So like, it was very annoying as a child to get beaten over the head with that, but it was great to kind of grow up and witness that. And it's definitely kind of been ingratiated in the back of my mind, especially being so close to poverty, and even going back to India and seeing, how my parents lived, how my grandparents lived. It's definitely a huge eye-opening experience. But New York aside, most of my life, I actually grew up in Las Vegas. That's where most people know me from. And that was a dope experience in a lot of ways. You learn a lot about, the realities of life at a very young age, because they literally just kind of advertise it. You know what I mean? That's just kind of the very premise of Las Vegas in a lot of aspects. And because of that, you learn a lot of the business that comes along with it. I think people would say that for any big cities, but I would definitely say, the Miamis of the world, especially the Vegases of the world, the LAs of the world. If you grew up in certain boroughs in New York, even New York too, there is this type of hustle mentality. And, you see people getting screwed over left and right, but you also see a lot of very interesting money stories develop, whether it's like quick quick rich money or even just like long-term dynastic empires getting built. So just being in all of those environments was great to watch, and definitely there's a lot of cool stuff I learned from that.
There's a lot of great history, man, and it's cool to, you know, have more representation from Las Vegas. That's not what people stereotypically think about it. You know, there's more going on in Vegas than casinos and whatever else you would consider the stereotype.
Right.
You know, there's real people that live there with real careers, real businesses being built, and it's a fully functional city.
Right.
And it's good that you touched on that a little bit. So, you know, having your background sort of influence you as much as it did, sort of tell the people, you know, how that brought you to the profession that you have now.
So it all started really with this high school AP class that my Indian ass dad forced me to take. As most things happen in life, you know, any parent who is a little bit too obsessed about their kid getting into college always is trying to look up, you know, certain AP credits or certain extracurriculars that might be able to get your, you know, kid over the edge to get into, you know, whatever that university is. And my dad was like, hey, you know, just looking through your school's curriculum, I noticed they have a computer science course. You're going to take that. Like, you should definitely take that. You know, and he kind of, at that time, I was kind of neutral to it because, you know, the only type of, I guess, coding experience that I had at that time was just like hacking emulators and stuff like that. You know, my parents were really, really cheap with me and all of my siblings when we were kids. Definitely me less so than my other siblings, but because of that, you know, we never had cable. We never really had multiple video game consoles or anything like that. So it would really, really suck when you would go to school and like kids would be talking like, oh my God, you play this freaking Nintendo game? Like, you know, this new Smash Bros game is off the hook. And like, you know, for sure, you can't even float that shit by your parents because like, that's going to get gunned in a second. That type of inspiration led me to figuring out, you know, all right, well, how can I mirror some of these like same experiences that my friends and stuff are having on their consoles, but by doing it with my laptop. I know my laptop can run games, like it has the same type of hardware and capabilities. Like, why can't I do that? And it turns out you can, although not all of it legal, kids. I would definitely not recommend going down the full path that I did and like, you know, like totally wrecking out ROMs and like hacking like Nintendo for. I would used to get like GameCube CDs and stuff and like would just rip the game off of like my friends' CDs and would port it onto my laptop, and there'd be enough code in there where you'd be able to add like mods and like hack through stuff such that not only the game could become playable, but you could do stuff with your emulator that, you know, other people wouldn't be able to do necessarily on a Nintendo GameCube or a DS. And so I think that was like the first innate, you know, natural attraction that led me to coding that was like on my own. But if I had to be completely transparent, like Indian parents played a huge role into this. And I mean, I think it's very, very interesting because you can kind of see in terms of ethnicities, like, you know, certain ethnicities dominate certain industries. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think this is something hopefully we'll be able to talk about throughout this whole time together. But, you know, I think it's important for us to educate each other about like how, you know, we choose to go about career paths and industries and how certain people have been able to dominate those industries. Because it all really starts from kind of like this parenting educational standpoint. Even if it's not parenting, like whatever your role model is in your life, they play a heavy hand on, you know, how that kid's career path is usually going to end up. And that's the thing that happened with me. You know, I took that AP and I got my ass kicked. That was probably like one of the hardest high school classes I ever took. And for the most part, I was able to cruise through high school, like even through other APs and stuff like that. I'd get 5s and 4s and like not study like the physics exams. I would not study for it at all and would be able to get like 5s on that easily. Biology too, but computer science was a brand new thing. You know, the way that you have to think about it, syntactically what's going on, like you understand words as a language, but then once you have to start writing out words and code, it's like, you know, very, very difficult to kind of separate those things. So Yeah, I remember I was just getting punched in the gut. Like I was getting like, C's. There was even one exam I got a D on, and I was like, oh my God, I've never gotten a D in my life. Like this is ridiculous. Like, but throughout all of the pain that class gave me, heading into the AP, I thought I was totally going to fail because I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. Like, I can't pick this up. And then lo and behold, I got to that AP and I did really, really well on that. And, that kind of gave me the boost of confidence that, okay, even me at my lowest, if I put my mind to it, I can push through and learn the things that I need to actually be successful down this career path. And I also knew previously, like I mentioned from before with the emulator stuff, like there are these really cool ways I could see these life skills that I'm learning through computer science be applied into things that I care about. At that time, it was video games, but I mean, there's so many things that are controlled by software. So I knew that I wouldn't be putting myself in a box by the age of 18 or even 22 when I got out of undergrad by going down computer science. And I knew that there was enough technical skills that would actually interest me, even outside of having to get a career path. So that's kind of what led to that.
Gotcha. So, and just give a brief explanation of sort of like what kind of high school you went to as well. Like, was it just a public school? Was it a private school? Was it a college prep school? Because a lot of people think that makes a big difference in like where you end up. So I just want you to share your experience.
Yeah. So at that time, I was going to a private school. I think it was called it's still called the Meadows. I think it's just called the Meadows at that time. But most of my life I was in public school in Nevada. I think at that time was like 49th, or there might have been a couple of months where it was like 50th in education. And they weren't even offering computer science programs. So I do have to fully be transparent and being like, because I happened to be colored and was going to this like mostly, white, like very privileged private school at that time. And just being able to, have the opportunity of being able to be the shoe in minority, I was able to kind of take advantage of those opportunities that other students might have necessarily not have been. And it led to, me kind of being able to start my career path. I don't know if people necessarily get that same level of exposure. As a future voter and as somebody who wants to, pass policy and kind of influence the way that, I guess like the policies around education are in the future, I definitely do feel like coding literacy and financial literacy needs to get taught a lot more on the public education level. And I don't think that is readily available. However, what I would say as a ray of hope between, where we are today and where I was back then is that the internet has gotten a lot more evolved in being able to create publicly accessible teaching tools to learn how to code. Whether that's like free online YouTube videos, whether it's actual just like startups that will literally teach you how to code for free, or just other variety of websites that will just give you enough information for you to learn how to code really, or just make things that you wouldn't necessarily make without code. And that's been pretty cool. I think that it's really awesome that we have these tools available, but now I think the issue is just making sure that we organize it and actually present it to people so it's easy for them to pick up and learn.
And if you're already online watching this, I mean, just go over to YouTube and look up like anything you want to learn. Like YouTube University is literally your best friend. I've learned so much from that resource in itself that, I feel like it can provide a lot to a lot of people. And also, if you're looking for experience or something to help you with your learning and maybe get you into a new environment or a new opportunity, look at the links in the description. I've put down there like career placement tests, personality tests. You can figure out who you are and what fits your personality best. I've also put down there links to free, paid internship opportunities in summer research programs, so you can go learn something new in a new place and get paid to do it. I mean, these options are out there for you all. I mean, you can Google and find them, but I've just put some of the ones that I've been exposed to on there so that you guys can have something to start with and then, be able to go down the path that you want to ultimately. So the resources are out there and we're here to provide you with them and that knowledge. So check the link in the description. But I think that's really great, and I appreciate you for being, open and transparent about that as well, because that is kind of a point of contingency for a lot of youth, especially because they think like, oh, but I go to a public school, like there's no way I can possibly go to college, or oh, I go to a public school, or I go to a private school, or this person goes to a private school, so they must be like, super smart or super like sheltered or conservative, and that's not the case. Like there's all different kinds of people in all different kinds of schools with different kinds of backgrounds, so it's great to have that representation. But now let's move forward to where you are today, which is a software engineer. Correct? Software engineer is your title
Yes.
at the Home Depot. The Home Depot. Get it right, people. Don't be out here saying Home Depot. It's the
Facts.
Home Depot. But before we start talking specifically about your day-to-day life and activities, walk them through sort of what your college experience was like as well, because college is one of those times where sometimes you're just going through the motions. You get on a path, on a curriculum, you're like, all right, I'll finish this, and then I don't know what's next. So walk them through what your experience was like in college and how it prepared you for what you do today.
College was a great experience for really building my character into becoming the engineer that I would be today. Yes, it taught me amazing, like technical skills that I'm able to apply to my job every day. But honestly, if you're paying attention, you actually really, care about what you're learning. I don't think the curriculum that I went through at my university is going to be radically different than what you're going to learn at any other university, whether it's the community college or even frickin' Harvard. There's going to be certain core skills that are going to be hireable straight out the gate. Those skills obviously are going to be, understanding of databases, like can you write queries? Can you actually understand the performance of these queries? Can you take a shitty query and make it look better so it's more performant? What's the difference between MySQL and NoSQL, like the types of databases? That's just one core aspect of that. And that's a whole type of software engineering, by the way. I don't think a lot of people even know this. When I was getting into this,
break it down for them. What are the different types?
Yeah, when I was getting into software engineering, I thought there was like, oh, you get one job, it's a software engineer, you write code, and that's it. Like, that's actually very not true. And if you choose to become a software engineer, take some college courses in this, I think you'll learn about more of the specificities. But to quickly break down some high-level ones, there's being just a database engineer. So going back to all the database stuff that I talked about, those are the problems you're typically going to have to solve for a company, whether it's a startup or a corporation. There's a regular software engineer, which is typically, usually if you see just software engineer in the title, you can imply that they're a full stack software engineer. And we'll get into the different types of software engineers here in a little bit, but I'll say for right now, a full stack engineer is doing a little bit of everything. You're kind of writing back-end code, and we'll get into the differences of front-end and back-end. These are two terms I'll be using a lot here in the future for people who don't know. I'll make sure I explain that later, but you do a little bit of back-end code, you're doing a little bit of front-end code. You're actually, self-QAing a lot of your stuff. You might not have a quality engineer with you, and you might even be handling potential deployments, depending if you have a reliability engineer with you or not. There's database engineer, like I just mentioned. There's full stack software engineer or just software engineer. That's what I am. Now there's also some specialty software engineer jobs that you can be doing too. Some might pay less or more depending on that skill set and the priority of that skill set at the company. But we'll get into those right now. So those specific software engineering jobs would be a front-end engineer. Now a front-end engineer is somebody who specifically works on the design aspects of whatever product or service that software company is choosing to sell. So let's take Uber, for example, right? A front-end engineer for that would be writing all of the code that would design pretty much all of the user interface or the stuff that you, the customer, will interact with on Uber to get that car or to actually sign up to be a driver for Uber. So that means the menus, the buttons, the way that the maps looks, how the people choose to interact with pretty much getting to the function of actually having to call that core or drive. So pretty much all of the steps that it takes for you, the customer, to get to the point where you want to call the task of either, getting your Uber or becoming an Uber driver, that's all the responsibilities of a front-end engineer. And like I mentioned from before, the big aspect of front-end engineers is they're working on design stuff. So pretty much see these people as, the superhero versions of web designers. They're like web designers, but they can do a whole lot more stuff. So they're going to be able to do web design stuff, but they're also going to be able to potentially do mobile development and also just make design stuff from scratch that will be reused. So if I make, a toolbar, can I use that toolbar in multiple other places? They might also handle other tasks that might be a little bit more code dependent, like authorization or authentication of a person's identity and stuff like that, getting their credit card info, things like that. Those will be little minor tasks that front-end engineers might have to deal with, but most of their work is related onto the design front. And even though it sounds cool and it's like, oh, this is this great design job, there is still a bit of technicality that comes with that, because there's a lot of geometry at play, because not only do you have to deal with making the perfect design for this screen that you're working on right now, but that same design has to look the same for every single screen ever. So that means your smartphone, that means a big ass LCD TV screen. So how do you make sure that the code that you wrote that looks perfect on this, let's say 16 by 16 square screen that you're coding this on, how do you make that look good everywhere? How do you make sure that the fonts actually stay the same everywhere? How do you make sure that the colors stay the same everywhere? Because screens have different types of color ratios, aspect ratios. They might even interpret colors differently. They might not have the same fonts that you would expect them to have. They might not be using the same web browser that you're having. They might have a different pixel density than what you're anticipating. And so to compensate for all of those random cases, that's where you can kind of start getting into the weeds of the design aspect of being a front-end engineer. Okay, so that's front-end. We got that out of the way. The next one after that is being a back-end engineer. So now this is the second half of what goes on, right? We just talked about front-end, now we're on back-end. So back-end is handling all of the functionality of what that good product or service does on behalf of that software company. So to go back to our Uber example, the back-end engineer is going to write the code that is actually going to go get you that Uber driver. That back-end engineer is actually going to write the code that is going to take the information that you gave to the front-end engineer through your user interaction on Uber when you were signing up to be the Uber driver. The front-end engineer gets all that information, and it's just sending it off to the back-end engineer, essentially. The back-end engineer has to write the code to take that information from the front-end engineer and actually convert it into a real tangible task where we can show evidence, not only to the engineer, but to Uber and that potential driver that, hey, you are now a Uber driver. So all of the functionality really of what a product or service does comes from that back-end engineer. And usually the languages that are related to that, by the way, and I'll make sure I go back to talk about the languages for the front end too, but the languages that are usually related to a back-end engineer would be something like C++ if, or even Objective-C if you're dealing with something that's a little bit more low-level hardware focused. Like, for example, like Tesla engineers will probably be working with C. Apple engineers do too, because you're working with hardware at that aspect, right? Like iPhones, autonomous driving, if you're Tesla, you're going to be working with chips a lot. So then in those times, you'll probably be using something like C++ or Objective-C. Java is another great example of a back-end language as well. In terms of front-end languages, now that's going to be a lot more of JavaScript, CSS, HTML, right? Because those are the web design ones. But then there's also frameworks where you can actually start to do some of that other stuff, like I mentioned from before, authentication and stuff like that. That's going to be coming from technologies such as AngularJS, Angular, React JS. Some people even like using these mobile frameworks that will let you make a website and a mobile app at the same time. So examples of that would be React Native and Flutter. But, you know, there's new types of languages that come out every year. And this is kind of one of the big deciding factors of if you should be interested as a software engineer, or if you would be interested in picking up coding. Just know that this stuff is like fucking sneaker releases. Like, there's new stuff coming out every year. There's going to be a new Jordan colorway every year in your favorite fucking pair of J's, right? But and you have to keep on track of that. You have to understand what's the new stuff coming on, what's the pros and the cons, you know, how does this perform against the other thing. And so there's always going to be new stuff coming out, and there's always going to be a learning curve. So being a software engineer is being a constant learner, and so you have to be comfortable with that. So that's front end and back end. There's also two other specific ones that I mentioned real quickly, and I'll make sure I mention these two, and then we'll kind of wrap this up, which is a QA engineer and a reliability engineer. Now, these two are a little bit more rare to find in the company because they're so specifically like focused on one narrow-minded thing, but they're integral and very, very important for a company's success. So the QA engineer is essentially the quality assurance engineer. Their responsibility is taking the code that the other engineers, like the front end and the back end engineers and the full stack engineers, the code that they've developed, and their only responsibility is to test that code before it gets out into production, which is essentially, you know, before it gets to the customer's hand. If we're working on a new feature, going back to the Uber example, let's say Uber is now deciding to be like, yo, all right, we're rolling out tricycles. The people need tricycles. We got to get them out. How are we going to do this? The other engineers, they write the tricycle code. They got the tricycle code ready. The QA engineer, he literally tries to hack the code that the other engineers wrote to break it. Like, he's literally hacking their other stuff to break it because he wants to find out, he or she wants to find out all of the ways that this code could get wrong before a customer can get in there and mess something up for real. So if you're really good at hacking, you're really good at breaking stuff, if you're really good at blowing shit up and then rubbing it in other people's faces, being a QA engineer might just be the job for you. It's a very fulfilling job. It's a very important job. It's kind of underappreciated. I wish, you know, more big tech companies actually kind of made more of a concerted effort to appreciate these engineers. I know at my company specifically, they kind of like started hashing those out, or phasing those out rather, because they wanted their software engineers to actually QA their own work, because there's also this equally bad trap where, you know, software engineers are like, I don't have to worry about these edge cases. I don't have to worry about bugs. Like, I'll let my QA engineer catch that and then bring it back to me. And so, you know, you can always fall in those pit traps, but like, that's exactly what a QA engineer is for. You know, they're trying to catch the bugs, right? And then the reliability engineer is specifically designed for actually getting the code after it's been tested, after it's been improved on and all that stuff. Once it's finally ready to get out, they get the code out to the customer's hand. Because there is this transition phase where you have the code that the engineers worked on that they want to get out, and then what's already existing. And you have to make sure that you get this from the hand to the right to the hand to the left without anything blowing up or anybody noticing. That's a very, very difficult job, and there's a lot of things that have to go right, and there's a lot of communication that has to happen, not only between the engineers, but also your other stakeholders at that time, whether it's your business partners, whether it's your customers, whether it's the people that you partner with for that product or service at that time. And so that reliability engineer is usually on top of all of that. They're usually night owls. They'll be watching like batch jobs happen, things that happen with the code that's supposed to be recurring that you think is going to be working. They're really keeping their eye on that to make sure it's working. So they're kind of like constant night hawks. They get paid very, very well, but it's also, you know, your eye has to be on the prize the whole time. And you also have to be really, really smooth at making sure that you can turn certain things on and off and transition things the right way, and allocate the resources that you need to make sure that everything works properly. That's been one of the blessings that I've been learning working at the corporation that I do right now, is that, you know, as an engineer, you can write this code and you'll be like, oh, okay, I can see how this is going to work because I can see it run on my laptop. We're good. But people don't think about how that code is going to perform when it's on 2 million devices. Like, and that's how quickly this stuff can scale up. We're going from something that I'm writing on my laptop, 2 weeks from now, 2 million people are using it just like that. Is it going to perform the same when 2 million people are trying to type in the same stuff and log in at the same time and do all this stuff? not necessarily. So how do you anticipate that? How do you measure the performance of that? How do you make sure that we're actually allocating the servers, the databases, that we need to actually make sure all this stuff runs smoothly? That's what a reliability engineer will handle. So they work really, really closely with a lot of engineers on all fronts and a lot of other stakeholders too. And it's a really important role. But yeah, those are, for the most part, most of the engineers that you'll kind of find within software engineering.
That was an excellent breakdown, man. I mean, it's really helpful. It's not only for the youth and other professionals that are watching this, but also for me, because there's like a lot of things in there that I didn't know. So it's always good for me to grab a piece of knowledge as well. That way I can make sure I'm communicating properly with the people that I work with, or just people out in the public. That's really crazy that I knew that quality engineers existed. Obviously, like by osmosis, being friends with so many software engineers, but it's just still crazy that some major companies also run little campaigns or have little rules where it's like, if you're out in the public and you find a bug or you're able to hack the system or something, like if you report it to us, we'll pay you like X amount of dollars. Like that whole thing is crazy because it's like you're already paying somebody to do that. So why would you pay the public to do it anyways? But I mean, there's probably some other things that they have very good reasons for doing that. But that's just me like thinking outside the box and trying to poke holes in questions and things. But I digress. Moving back, so you've gone through school and you've gotten your degree and now you're off into the workforce. And we're here today at the Home Depot. So can you describe sort of what a day in the life is for Johnny at Home Depot?
I'll give you my regular as if I was in the office day, and then after that, I'll just kind of tell you how we've adjusted with working from home. So typically for me, I attempt to work a 9 to 5. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. More instances than not, though, it's shorter, which is nice. There's a lot of really good work flexibility with being a software engineer. I think that's one of the biggest selling points with being a software engineer. Nobody's going to hold you to office hours. Nobody's going to make you, clock in and clock out. What they're going to measure is the code that you write and how you partner with other stakeholders to make sure that that code gets out properly. And because of that, there have been certain instances where I've been on top of my job and I'll be in and out of the office in 4 hours. Like that's a very, very real thing that can happen. But they have to be for the, some of the most productive hours of your life, and you actually have to be able to show tangible results for that. So with that being said, typically, I'm there from 9 to 5, and usually we'll have something that's called a stand-up meeting in the beginning of that day, where all the other engineers and our product manager at that time we'll all kind of come together and give our daily report of the stuff that we were working on yesterday, the progress that we're at, potential blockers that might be inhibiting us from being able to, get the code out at a certain timeline or test it in a certain way. And then also kind of talk about, future deployments of, when that code is actually going to get to the customer's hands. And that's usually led by the reliability engineer in those instances. So we'll have like a quick, 30, 45-minute powwow about that. After that, my calendar is pretty much open until sometime around the evening, and the only thing that's going to be able to kind of change that will be architectural meetings. So sometimes before we jump into writing code, especially if several engineers are working on one project or product or service at that time, we'll usually come together and actually write these visual diagrams to show all right, here's the new, feature we're going to add. Here's the project as it is right now. Here are all of the classes, and here are all the components of the code that we have written out so far, and we'll kind of visually show it in a map. And then we'll kind of think of the new feature that we're going to be adding, and we're all right, well, we know we're going to have to go in and change this component on the map to actually add this new feature, and we're going to actually have to make a new component, to work with that component too. So let's make sure we draw it on the map, and we kind of update, these architectural diagrams to make sure that it scopes out the long-term plan of how we're going to get to writing all of the code. And that's really, really important. That's something I never really did as a young engineer that I wish I got better at, which was thinking from more of that large level diagram scope and then kind of jumping into the implementation. I think, me personally, I was always like really narrow-minded in problem solving, such that I wouldn't actually think about how everything would play well together. But as I've worked more and more in my profession, I've seen the importance of that, and because of that, I tend to have a lot more meetings about that. I tend to get dragged into a lot more meetings about that because people tend to respect my opinion a lot more now too for these. So that's usually good, but that'll usually take up my afternoons or evenings. And then, once every week or once every 2 weeks, we'll kind of have this retrospective meeting where all the engineers and our UX partners and also our product managers and stuff like that, and even business stakeholders might stop by. We'll all kind of get together either weekly or bi-weekly to go over kind of the work that we've gotten this far, make sure that it aligns with what we're trying to accomplish that quarter in terms of the code that we're trying to get out, and actually just, kind of just check it, really just see where we're doing, how we are, and if we're on track to make sure that we're meeting the goals that we said we were going to as a team. But yeah, those are pretty much the premises of my meetings. Otherwise, everything else is free time. Now, I mean, obviously, when I say free time, this is like time you should be using the code, but that might not necessarily always be the case. Sometimes, like I mentioned from before, there's always going to be a learning curve with software engineering. So there might be times where you're just researching stuff for like a whole day or a half day. There might be times where you're talking to other engineers because you might have to leverage some code that they wrote, or you might actually have to add something into their code bases. So there might be times where you're communicating with other engineers. But for the most part, it is writing code. That is what I do. I would say approximately 80 to 85% of my day is writing code. And, my managers and stuff like that up above me design my workday to be like that, because it's very, very important for me to write the code that I write. Otherwise, they wouldn't be paying me them sweet, sweet dollars. So,
yeah, man, that's great. That's a good insight into sort of what a day in the life of a software engineer is in general, not just at Home Depot as well, because I do feel like, just for me personally, my job as a salesperson is I need to be selling. So if I'm spending all of my days doing data entry and, data analysis, I'm not getting paid to do what I'm actually hired to do. So it is very important that, you do have that management and that structure so that you can perform to the best of your abilities and do the role that you're ultimately hired to do. So I completely agree with you there. That being said, I'm sure there are a couple difficult things that you faced in your career and probably still face today, but what would you say are a couple obstacles that you've dealt with thus far?
So I'll probably say maybe like 2 obstacles that I kind of had to get past to get me to the point that I'm at. And then I'll probably mention one other obstacle that I'm dealing with currently that I'm hoping to kind of lead to some positive change in the future. So the 2 obstacles that I'm thinking of that were from the past was just making sure that I found the right job for me. Like I mentioned from before, parents were super Indian. Most people of my ethnicity either get shoved into being a doctor or an engineer. And I had to really, really fight that from an existential standpoint. Like, I really, really have never been a go with the flow, do what everybody else is doing type of guy. And, as a teenager, I sure as hell didn't want to apply that to my career. It's one of the biggest decisions you make. And I think a lot of kids feel that way. A lot of kids should feel that way. Like, nobody wants to be put into this box. Nobody wants to be forced to do anything. Nobody wants to be forced to get a job or go down a career path because it's financially stable, especially if they don't know if they care about it or not. And when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, it's really difficult to say that without a shadow of a doubt, you have all of these things figured out. So kind of battling through, that sense of purpose as I was getting through these really hard college courses and stuff like that mentally. That was something I had to deal with, especially because, I mean, the university that you and me went to, Kenton, that was a huge culture shock, like just in terms of, you know, where I was living at and my ethnicity and stuff like that. Like, I'll put it like this for everybody else who doesn't know stuff about our college. Like, there were so few minority kids there that all of the minorities was like one minority, if that makes any sense at all. It's like, oh, like, you know, the same way that there would probably be like, you know, 10 or 15% like Latino people like in this class, like there was 10 to 15% minorities like in our graduating class. So, you know, the combination of that culture shock, me not really being kind of like this nerdy, let's go play League of Legends after class type of kid. And then also just like not being able to really understand the connections between what I was learning in my college courses and then like what I wanted it to do, having to fight through that was really difficult for me at that time. But the thing that helped me get through that, that became an invaluable skill later on in my career, was the ability to learn actually to self-teach yourself, and then also learn when to actually like network and get help from people you might not necessarily be comfortable talking to. Those were two really important skills that I had to learn from that obstacle. The self-teaching part, just being, I mean, you know, part of that is really just not giving up, being persistent, like actually believing that you can do that. That if you put your mind to it and like are determined, you can solve the problem, which is easier said than done. I think there's some really tough problems that every college kid faces, and there's been huge moments of doubts where I was like, oh my God, am I even cut out for this? So obviously fighting through that, but then just learning that there are other resources outside of the resources that your prof tells you. Like, you know, usually profs will be like, come talk to my assistant professor, come to talk to me, or just like go talk to one of the students in your class. And those were the three things that our university would keep telling us. But luckily, being in software engineering, there's so many more tools on top of that. So I had to teach myself, like, no, there's more than a couple of ways for me to go about learning this info, whether that's websites, forums, other YouTube videos of other people solving similar problems. I started to learn how to lean more on that than I did even certain aspects of my classes. Like, I went to my classes to kind of learn the information that I knew I needed to learn. And I would take as much information as I could through notes. And obviously going to class is a very important thing, very underrated. Don't miss classes when you can. But, you know, that can only take me so far. The thing that helped me cement my knowledge was me actually going through the extra work of kind of finding those extra videos or Stack Overflow pages, or maybe even GitHub references where somebody else has solved problems similar to the ones that I was facing. That was a huge aspect of the self-teaching part. And then, yeah, the second part is just learning how to work with other people that are not like you, right? I think that's a very obvious life skill, and it's something that is, you know, bigger than software engineering. But I think that a lot of people from the outside in get really infatuated with this idea, like, oh, you know, software engineering, anybody can pick it up, anybody can learn how to code because it's on the internet. I could just teach myself how to, you know, code and be rich. And like, that's, you know, not necessarily the case of how that tends to work out. If it was like that, I don't think everybody would be getting paid as much as they do. And I don't think there would be as high of demand for the job, you know what I mean? Because the supply would be higher. But because that's the case, you know, because the supply is so low, you end up getting some real freaking oddballs in software engineering, and the lack of diversity is really stark. I mean, it's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to come on this program, was to kind of try to convince other people, especially Black, Latino people, to get into software engineering. Like, this is an industry that is dominated by white and Asian men. And like, do we really trust white and Asian men to fully understand the grasp of humanity to solve all of the problems that we need them to with code? In theory, you could be like, oh yeah, I mean, there's tough math problems. There's not really any ethical consequences to that. But when we get to, applied use cases like artificial intelligence, voice recognition, like racial biases and stuff like these can pop up in these technologies that we're building. And if we don't have voices in the room that really represent all people, we're going to get super screwed over. Even minorities aside, like women is a really, really big thing too. We definitely need a lot more women in the industry, and most women that work in the industry usually come out and retire early or switch career fields because it's like so sexist and just like filled with these like, like chat room dweebs, you know what I mean? Like these are the same guys who will be like going crazy on 4chan. Like those are the guys who are going to be your software engineer managers and stuff like that. And the future of our industry will not end up good if that's the case. So it's really important to get more people out there like that. But to bring this back to the original topic, having to learn how to work with other people that you might not necessarily understand their way of life. You eventually learn that y'all have more in common than you guys have more against each other, and together, even your perspective and their perspective can lead to a great collaboration that can lead to great things. I think especially in the past couple of years, just because of the climate that we're living in, it's been really difficult to lose sight of that. But I do think that people shouldn't see software engineering as a intimidating thing because of the demographic of people who work in there. Rather, see it as a way of inspiration to know that you, that potential future engineer, could be that change, and that you will have the opportunity to collaborate with these people. These people have also immense value too, like technical skill, knowledge. And the reason why people choose to live these ways of lives are very much shaped by the code that they write. And so the philosophy even behind that can kind of get intertwined. And you learn life skills about how to communicate with other people that are different than you, vice versa. And then also you learn how to collaborate and make dope code together. The one that I'm currently dealing with, the third thing, and I'll make sure I wrap this up real quick, is actually making sure that you learn how to network in a corporation once you get into a corporation. So the life skills that, this is something I learned very, very recently, and it took me 2 years of industry experience to actually learn this. And I hope that whoever's listening to this can learn from my pitfalls. I've been trying to get promoted here for a while. I've been putting in the work to actually do that the whole time. My manager has recognized it. We have like mid-year and full-year reviews every year, and I've exceeded expectations every single time based off of like, our grading scale. I've ended up on the highest grading scale with a damn near perfect score every single time. And so I just assumed if I keep producing good work and it's being measured, then it's only a matter of time before I get promoted. That is not true. If you think just doing good work is going to get you promoted, unfortunately, you're sadly mistaken. There's a really big, important aspect to any promotion, and that is actually networking. That is immensely huge. So kind of similar to what I was talking about from before, in that, there are these skills that I had to learn in college about collaboration and learning to work with other engineers, but networking is very different. Networking is actually being able to show your value as an engineer and the work that you're doing on a quarterly basis to every stakeholder that you interact with. That will actually eventually, help you build a reputation. Now, that reputation is extremely important because typically for most promotion cycles, what will happen is there will be a huge meeting. Like regardless of what company or corporation you work at, whether it's a startup or even just like a big IPO'd company, there's usually generally going to be this like meeting, whether it happens quarterly, every half year, or every year, where they will get everybody in that organization, that team, that specific industry, and they will go through name by name the people that they're, talking about that works for them. And they'll all decide collectively as managers and as directors, do we want to promote that person or not? And so the reason why I bring up networking is you're not going to get promoted if most of the people in that room don't know who you are. So even if you are the fucking guy for your team and your manager knows it and your manager swears by you, that's still not going to be enough to get the job done. because at the end of the day, your manager isn't every manager in the org, or, you know, whatever that next level is up above you. You have to be making sure that the work that you're doing is being valued by the people who are not just one level above you, but 2 to 3 levels above you. And so you really, you know, especially as a young person coming in to try to build your career at a corporation, you know, you want to stay there for some time, or even if you don't, you just want to get promoted. It's important to make sure that you're showing your value of the work that you're doing, not only to the people within your team, but making sure that you advertise, you know, that value to the other teams inside your organization and the people up top. That means not being afraid to reach out to people that you might not talk to on a day-to-day basis to go get lunch or coffee. That means maybe setting up a mentoring session or a sponsorship session with somebody in a completely different organization that has huge clout, that you know would be able to have huge, you know, I guess like vocal sway over the people that might be handling your promotion. And also just being able to make sure that you have a good understanding of the larger aspects of what the corporation is doing from a business standpoint, right? You're not ever going to be able to sell your value as an employee until you can understand how the work you're doing ties in to the deliverables of what that company is trying to get done. So, you know, to look at the Home Depot, right, sales drives what we do as a retail company, right? So if you can actually tangibly measure, you know, the code that I wrote helped drive up sales indirectly, you know, by this amount, or the code that I wrote that actually helped solve this problem inside of the store freed up these workers to not deal with this issue. Now they have X amount of hours to actually go make sales. This should help indirectly boost sales. Making those narratives, those arguments on behalf of yourself and being able to actually communicate that out to various groups, not just the people in your team, is going to help get you promoted. And that's the lesson that I've been learning this year. So that's been another obstacle too.
Oh man, that's a word right there, man. Networking is super, super key. And not only just networking for the sake of building relationships and connections, but networking with a purpose, right? Like networking because you want that promotion, or networking because, you know, you want your work to be recognized by people in positions of power. Like these things all play into it. And that's something that I did even when I first started my job. Not the job that I currently work at, because I started during COVID-19, so it's a little more difficult to do this. But at the job I was previously at, you know, the first month, really, I spent like learning the basics of what I needed to do my job, and just reaching out to people, not even my managers, like people 2-3 levels above me, just to like get my name in their mouth, just to have them be aware of my presence. And that's something that's really critical, especially when you're at a bigger company, because you're so far removed from these people. Even though they're making the decisions on your career and your professional development, you know, there's a big gap between you and them. So if you can bridge that gap somehow, you will definitely help yourself out. So I think what you said is very, very important for people to realize. And actually, that's something that I should probably add to the networking series that I'm going to put on here as well. So I'll make sure to make a note of that and add that to that. But that's great. I mean, thank you for being vulnerable, you know, about some of those challenges, because everybody doesn't want to share everything. But I think those are key things that we need to discuss and be open about. But, you know, outside of the challenges, what are some of the things that make you excited about your career? The things that wake you up every morning and, like, you know, get you out of bed and say, hey, I'm ready to go code. Like, I work at the Home Depot and I'm going to make some stuff. Like, I'm gonna go do it. So what gets you excited to do that?
You know me, man. I've always been an individual about moving product. And so when I see, you know what I'm saying, business has been booming at the Home Depot. I'll tell y'all that much. You know what I'm saying? So obviously, you know, moving product is always gonna wake me up in the morning. But especially working at the Home Depot, I never thought I would be getting so into the aspects of supply chain as I would be at working at this company. Usually, for people who don't know, technology aside, you know, supply chain management is probably one of the most lucrative industries you could be in, and it's like the forefront of just problem solving in general. The reasons that the Apples of the world and the Amazons of the world have these trillion-dollar valuations is because hundreds of trillions of valuations, by the way, is because they're really, really good at moving product. And that's all supply chain management is taking a fuck ton of product and being able to distribute it very quickly to any location at any time. And most of the work that I do as a software engineer, especially right now, is kind of on that side of things. And so kind of just understanding a lot of these problems that the Home Depot is trying to solve is the same problems that any retail company is trying to solve right now at a really, really high level, whether it's the Walmarts of the world, whether it's the Targets of the world, you name it. And so that's an aspect that's really, really cool in terms of just like, what problems am I trying to solve with the code? I think it's really, really interesting just to learn how to move product, because like, who knows, like, those skills that I'm learning from just seeing how people, I know it's so simple just to be like move products, like anybody can move a product, but when we're talking the scales of tens of thousands of different products that comes from hundreds of thousands of different vendors at different times, there's so many things that's connected to that there's a lot of ways that things can go wrong, and there has to be a lot of contingency plans attached to that. And so even though I might just be a cog in the machine now, those life skills are important to anybody who's building a business. If I want to turn around and sell something 10 years from now and build my own business off of that, I can take the skills that I learned from working at the Home Depot and apply those directly to that business, whether it's, being able to scale up that product, whether it's to actually be able to distribute that product in a vast amount of areas, being able to build a proper supply chain with your vendors, being able to get the parts that you need, partnering with your vendors, commercial real estate, that's a huge aspect of that as well. Like, you need warehouses, plural, if you want to sell in multiple cities, or if you want to be dominant in a city, you need to make sure that you're actually buying real estate or renting real estate in a certain area so you can actually transport stuff as easily. These warehouses kind of have to be built out like a graph or a web, and just seeing how product moves from one aspect to the other, how it gets measured and how it gets sold and how all of that data gets handled. That's pretty interesting. Maybe not necessarily in the aspect of like, oh, fuck yeah, we sold a hammer today, right? But later on down the road, when I see myself trying to make a business or something like that, I can take those problems and be like, all right, this is how this multi-billion dollar, IPO'd corporation handled it that I worked for. Maybe let me see if I can try to use a similar solution that they'd used. So that's cool. That's one part. The second part is waking up and knowing that more people that are up above me are trusting me to get harder problems solved, and trusting me. So that total cost of ownership for the work that I do is really, really fulfilling. Having other people trust me to be like, hey, can you go lead this initiative? Like, and I'm not necessarily hearing this from just my senior engineer now. I'm hearing this directly from a business person. Like, they're not even coming to talk to my manager about it. They know I can solve the problem, so they're coming to talk to me about it. That makes me feel good. And then also just, the satisfaction of being able to kind of pitch an idea to solve a problem that might have not been what everybody else was thinking, and seeing it work and seeing it roll out to the stores and having that immediate gratification of being like, wow, the code that I wrote, that I pitched, solved this problem. Those are things that really give me a large sense of fulfillment and purpose in what I do. But yeah, I mean, outside of that too, there's great benefits to just being a software engineer. Like, I to be fully honest with everybody else, like, you get paid well, you have great flexibility, you can work from home if you want to. There's a lot of things to look forward to in terms of your work-life balance with being a software engineer. So just, even just gratitude to getting to this point, and being able to actually take full advantage of all of those things, like nice healthcare and shit. Being able to get a match on my 401k, those are things that I care about too, that also help, fuel me into doing better work.
I love it, man. I love it. I'm truly happy that you're happy and excited about what you do, and your company is supporting you in not only your professional development, but also supporting you, personally in your life and giving you the affirmation that you need through your career. So that's just awesome, man. Normally at this time, we're almost done. I have a couple more questions. I would ask, people, okay, what advice do you have for somebody like the young Johnny or somebody looking to follow in your footsteps? But I'm going to switch it up here and instead ask a different question. And that is, what's something that we haven't discussed yet that maybe you want to address now for people?
I think it's just how to get hired as a software engineer. I think that's a lot of people sometimes will even graduate from college with a software engineering degree. They'll be like, I have this degree, I should be able to get the 6-figure job now, right? Wrong. Like, that is not how that works.
No.
You and me used to talk a lot. I used to, so like every quarter or two, there'd be this like career fair that would happen at our university. And so like Kent and me lived together for most of our years that we went to college. And so like him, most of our other roommates, most of our other classmates would go to this career fair. And I would absolutely not do it. And like, this was like the most like preposterous thing ever. Cause it was like, oh, Johnny just wants to be unemployed after college.
Not one. I didn't see you at one.
Never. Like, these guys would wake up 7 o'clock in the morning, like suits, like resumes prepared, all of this stuff. Like, and I'm just out here being a fucking bum. Like, and the main reason why is I used to get really depressed. Like the freshman year that I went to our career fair, I was like, I don't want to work at any of these companies. Like, there's nothing that like would actually satisfy me with working here. And I remember thinking like, because I don't want to get a job and work through this specific process that my university is telling me this is the only way you get employed. It's, this methodology or you're not going to be employed. Like, that's pretty much the thing that our college was selling us. Like, if you don't go through this path, if you don't go through this career fair, try to get employed by one of these employers, you're probably going to be unemployed. And like, that got me really, really depressed. Like, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to work at these companies. And so, I had to go through this long off the beaten path journey of figuring out what it means to get hired. And everything that I learned was self-taught. And I know you could speak to this too, because I think you went through a very similar path of kind of forging your own path of getting hired and building your own resume that was different than what our colleges taught us. But I'm really, really grateful that I went through that process. And the things that I would want to just, I guess, impart to anybody else who's dealing with a similar problem is this. Whether it's you have the college degree, you don't have the college degree, you have the skills that, you have the skills for what it takes to be a software engineer, but you don't know how to show it off. Here are the things that I would say. They're pretty simple. Whatever code that you can write, whatever project you have made that can show off your skill set in a certain language, whether it's the back-end code for saying, hey, I wrote this service that can accomplish this task in Java, or it's a website that you made, put that on GitHub. If you guys don't know what GitHub is literally just a website that is made to store code and show to other people. It does have hosting services, so if you actually wanted to host a website, you could in theory, but that's not the main point of it. The main point of it is to literally be like, here are the written code files that I have. This is what it does. You can go and look at it. And that was the biggest thing that helped me get hired personally, was actually putting my individual projects that I worked on. Because at that time, for my first job, I was really trying to be like a front-end engineer. I was like really trying to, work really well and kind of get this. I was really trying to get this this job at a company that I would care about, that would be part of my interests at that time. My first job that I was trying to go for, I was like, all right, I want to work either in music, sports, or fashion. Like, those were like the three things that I cared about at that time as a kid coming out of college. So I was like, I want to use my software skills. I want to apply it to one of those three, and I want to do front end stuff. Like, and that's a big piece of advice too. Like, write down the specific goals that you want to get accomplished for your career, because a lot of people, like I said from before, are like, oh, I want to be a software engineer because it pays a lot of money and I don't have to work that much. And like, that's not necessarily true. And that's the main reason that's driving you to that career path. You're probably going to end up failing, or you're just going to be miserable. And honestly, if I was wishing for the betterment of your life, it would probably be to fail early than to be really good and be miserable your whole life. There's nothing more depressing than being miserable at your job. And like, that's how midlife crises happens and stuff. Avoid that like the plague. But if you're just trying to actually have this passion and like, you know, have your career be based off of that, write down the specific things that you want. Like, I knew for me, I didn't want to live in the Midwest. I knew that I wanted to use my software skills for either fashion, music, or sports. And I knew I wanted to do front end work. And then from there, you're going to be able to carve out pretty much, you know, all of the job applications in the companies that are looking for those skill sets, right? And from there, what you'll notice is in every single one of those job applications, they'll say, like, literally, they'll leave you keywords of what languages they're kind of looking for you to be hireable for this position. And so you'll see like Java 8, Java 11 written out there. You'll see, you know, Angular written out there. You'll see React Native written out there. And so the best thing for you to do is to make sure you have a GitHub project that you can host on GitHub to be like, not only am I telling you I can do that and I took some college courses for that, or even if you didn't, like, regardless of whatever else it says on my resume, here's a tangible piece of evidence that I have on GitHub that proves to you I know this language. And so what I would do is whatever those languages were, they were mostly pretty common. So it'd be like 3 or 4 languages that would always be popping up in these job applications. And I'm like, all right, these are the 3 to 4 like technologies and languages that they care about. How do I make sure I put as many GitHub projects on here that shows them that I can do that? Okay, I make them. You know what I mean? I'll either go online and find other examples of people using similar technologies, or I'll follow a YouTube tutorial where they're like building a website using those technologies. And you'll go through, you'll do them, and then you'll put them on GitHub. And then what I did, and this is the big thing that helped, is that I'll take the link of that GitHub project, and I will literally copy and paste it into my resume. So they know I'm not capping at this point. Like, I got the link, like, you can go to this. And then even bigger than that, I would take it a step further. And this is what got me a ton of interviews and a ton of offers, to be honest. The way that I would take it a step further is once I was done and I put it on GitHub and everything, I would self-record a YouTube video of me going through how I built the code myself. And I would pull up the code and like the website side by side at that time, because I was trying to be a front-end engineer. And I would literally explain like, all right, here is our login page. Here's me using Google OAuth. Like, here's me using Google authentication right now to help with that login process. All right, let's go back to the code. Here is the code that I wrote to actually use Google's, you know, authentication process. Like, here's the way that I did it. Here's what I was doing with like the token and all this stuff. And this is how the login happens. And so like by being able to show a side by side of like, this is us using this dope website that I built, and this is how the code works with the website, I can take that to anybody. And they're going to want to hire me for being a software engineer, right? Like, you want to be able to present yourself in a way where it's so undeniable that you're a fit for that job application, given that skill set, that even a business person or somebody that's not working in that industry would be like, all right, they're a fit for that, because you've done almost too good of a job of beating them over the head with proof that you know what you're doing. And that right there is going to be a lot more impressive than you putting, you know, your college courses that you took up on there. Because, you know, at the end of the day, everybody's going to be taking like CSSC 230 algorithms. Like, what the fuck is algorithms? Like, if I'm a hirer and I pick that up and I just read algorithms, like, I don't know what the fuck that means, you know? And at the end of the day, a lot of these college courses have really generic, abstract names. And so being on the other side now as somebody who is actually in the process of learning what it is to hire and seeing the hiring process, you know, those tangible pieces of evidence, whether it's code in software engineering or even outside of, you know, software engineering, if it's sales or something like that, showing somebody maybe like your call script or how you've been able to successfully sell a product to somebody else, or the way that you're measuring your own success, if you can show those processes as tangible pieces of evidence and then put that on your resume, whether it's through links or something else, it's just really going to fortify your resume to another degree. And that's not a GPA, you know what I mean? That's not some fucking test score. That's not, oh, I took this course. That's something even better than all three of those things. And so you could be graduating with a 1.9. And if you've got the most padded, unfuckwittable GitHub with tons of explanations, tons of documentation of how you did the things that you did, then the only thing that's going to be stopping you from getting that job offer is just making sure you pass the interview process, which is still really, really important. And I don't think a lot of people know about how that works. And that should be, I feel like to even tackle that would be a separate conversation, but that's the best way to start getting the calls and to start getting the interviews at the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples of the world. That's how you go through that process of being hireable. Then there's the whole other beast of actually making sure you pass the interviews, but that's, you know, that's kind of like studying for the SAT or something like that, you know what I mean? It's like studying for a math exam. So there's the student aspect of, like, you know, once you get to the point where you're being interviewed, you have to learn the technical skills that you need to know to pass those interviews, which is very, very important. It's a completely different beast, and it's very, very math intensive, and it's very, very much being in the books and kind of studying these data structures and algorithms over and over again. But there's the whole process before that, which a lot of people fuck up at a lot more, which is just being hireable. And hopefully the stuff that I just said will make that a little bit easier for y'all if y'all are interested.
That was great, man. I feel like a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit and a lot of value out of that. So I appreciate you sharing that. And the one thing that I want to add on to what you said, that I think often gets overlooked a lot in the process of hiring, especially I think in the tech field, is being able to talk about yourself. Like, you naturally are a very like social person, and in the tech space, it's widely known and accepted that tech people are not the most socially, you know, comfortable, I should say.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. That's why, another testament to why we need more diversity, man. Like, I think when you end up having, you know, these monolithic demographics working at spots, people don't necessarily have to communicate as much, because if you're working with the same type of people all the time, y'all tend to think the same. Y'all tend to say the same stuff. So groupthink happens, and communication just inevitably takes a hit whenever groupthink happens. So to minimize groupthink, diversity is necessary, and hopefully we'll get there someday by this next generation.
I agree. I hope so. And I hope this platform is what brings people to them. So with that, I think we're going to close out here. Do you have any last minute thoughts or shout outs you want to give? You know, shout out to the moms, pops, family members, anybody like that.
Dude, shout out to the next generation of kids coming up. You know, whatever you're doing, don't let this, like, you know, older generation tell you a certain way of how you have to go about getting a job or a career. Just make sure that you understand the goals that you want, be sure of the goals that you want, and then just actually try to write out a path to get there. And what you'll find is a lot of other people have gone through the same struggles that you have, and leverage those other people's struggles to your benefits. Learn from their mistakes, reach out to people if you have that goal fleshed out, and work after it. You know, whether it's getting into a certain college that you want to. I'll tell y'all a quick story. There's this one girl that was dumber than a bag of bricks that I went to high school with. Her name was, and like, honestly, she was the shock of our graduating class because she got into USC. And the main reason that she got into USC is that USC once every half a year would come and have their own like little mini USC convention in Las Vegas at that time. And the only thing she did, this girl graduated, by the way, with like a 1.7, never took a single AP in her life. Like, you know what I mean? Just like chilled, was just being a cheerleader, was just enjoying the good life. But what she did make sure that she did was she went to that convention every half a year. She got the contact information of everybody that she talked to, and she kept in contact with them throughout her high school. And that right there was the difference between her getting into USC and her not getting into USC. And so, you know, whether you're becoming a software engineer or not, those little things of having that goal and then making sure that you reach out to anybody else who can help you get to that goal and having steps to get to that goal, whether they're conventional or not, that will lead to success no matter what. And if y'all can figure that out earlier than I did, then y'all will be more successful than me, which will be better because all of these old motherfuckers got all the money, and it's time for us young motherfuckers to get some money. So get some money.
Hey, I couldn't say any better myself, man. There it is. Network people, get out there, make contacts, get in touch with people. The beauty of COVID-19 is upon us in the sense that everyone's doing everything digitally, and people are at home to take your call, to take your message, and they're responding because they're bored. They don't have anything else better to do. So really take this time to reach out to people and, you know, get in contact with them and try to set something up. Even just a simple introduction can be much more impactful than what you think it may be. So just keep that in mind. But with that, we're going to close out here. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Black Professionals Project. I want to thank our guest, Mr. Jonathan Currian, for showing up and dropping the knowledge and the wisdom on you guys like a clues bomb out here. And also, as always, I'm going to remind you guys to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel because you know what? I do this for you guys. And I want it to be spread to everybody, and I do it for free. It's truly a nonprofit. We don't take any donations. We don't do any of that. And when I say we, I mean me, because it's just me. I'm doing it all by myself. So you know what? I'm here to help you guys. If there is any careers that you're interested in learning about, let us know in the comments. I will go personally find them, interview them, and put the video up so you guys can learn more about them in a platform that you want to hear about it on, which is YouTube, because it's YouTube University, people. It's free information, free knowledge. All you got to do is jump on the internet. So with that, make sure you check the links in the description for all the information that I talked about before. And I will see you guys next Monday, as I always do. Peace.